In our small town, where everyone knows each other, I was just another face in the crowd of familiar people. My life revolved around Sunday lunches, family celebrations, and the endless comparisons with my brother Jake, the perfect son. While he basked under the spotlight of our parents' favoritism, I settled for the crumbs of attention that were left behind. I never imagined that one lie from him could destroy everything I had built. Now, alone and far from everyone, I realized that sometimes we need to distance ourselves to find our true strength. The exclusion hurts, but it freed me from chains I didn't even know I was carrying. During Sunday dinner, the silence was shattered by Jake's venomous shout. His words hit me like knives, accusing me of a betrayal I never committed. My body froze, feeling every judging gaze from my parents piercing my soul. Slowly, I realized I was no longer a daughter, but a defendant in a trial where I wouldn't have the right to defend myself. The family hypocrisy turned that moment into my emotional funeral, but something inside me began to roar. I would no longer be the submissive victim. That cowardly accusation would be my declaration of independence. Jake thought he had destroyed me, but in reality, he was setting me free. The pain of exclusion consumed me like a slow poison, penetrating every cell of my being. My mind spun in a whirlwind of contradictory emotions: anger, sadness, despair, and a profound sense of injustice. How could my own family condemn me without even listening to me? Jake, with his calculated manipulation, had woven a web of lies, so perfect that my parents couldn't see beyond it. I remembered every moment I had been invisible, relegated to the shadows while my brother received all the attention. Now, those memories took on new meanings, no longer just recollections, but evidence of a twisted pattern of devaluation. My voice, once stifled by fear and submission, began to find a stronger, more resolute tone. So this is how a family dissolves? I thought sarcastically. With a simple accusation, decades of emotional ties reduced to ashes. The irony was almost comical. I, always the more cautious daughter, treated like a criminal with no right to defend myself. At first, the shock paralyzed me. Silent tears streamed down my face, mute witnesses to my vulnerability. But gradually, something within me started to change. Each tear carried less pain and more determination. The sadness transformed into fuel for my reinvention. I began to realize that my exclusion would not be my final sentence, but my declaration of independence. Jake thought he would destroy me, but in reality, he was gifting me freedom. I no longer needed to prove my worth to people who didn't want to see me. The silence imposed on me would now be my weapon. I would no longer explain myself, nor would I plead for understanding. My truth didn't depend on their approval. The family that rejected me would not be able to define who I am. Every negative thought that tried to consume me was transformed into energy. My pain turned into power. The initial vulnerability gave way to a strength I never imagined I possessed. I would no longer be the invisible Carla, but the one who finally saw her own light. "You think you destroyed me," I murmured to myself, "but in reality, you set me free." As time passed, my quest for proof became a meticulous exercise in resistance. Saved conversations on my phone, old emails, each fragment of communication would be my ammunition against Jake's lies. It was like assembling a complex puzzle, where each piece represented a bit of my truth being restored. Jake, however, continued his game of manipulation. Every tiny mistake was amplified by him, turning small moments into dramatic narratives that painted him as the victim. The perversity of his strategy was almost artistic. He not only attacked me but built a version of me so distorted that even I began to doubt. Loneliness surrounded me like a dense fog. Phones went silent. Messages were no longer answered. My friends, conditioned by his version of events, gradually drifted away. It was like being in a bubble of isolation, where each thought echoed only for myself. But something interesting happened in that isolation. I began to discover myself. The pain of rejection, once paralyzing, transformed into fuel for my reconstruction. I realized that my identity didn't depend on family approval, but on my own acceptance. Jake's manipulations revealed more about him than about me. His need to destroy me demonstrated his own emptiness. His fragility disguised as strength. Each of his attempts to belittle me was, in fact, a silent cry of his own insecurities. I began to document everything, not as revenge, but as protection. Records of conversations, screenshots of messages, a meticulous compilation that would prove my truth. I would no longer be the passive victim, but the narrator of my own story. The physical distance from my family transformed into emotional freedom. Each mile took me away not only from them, but from toxic patterns that had imprisoned me for years. The rejection that once felt like a sentence became my certificate of emancipation. My pain became strength. Jake thought he would destroy me, but in reality, he gifted me with the most precious tool, self-awareness. Each tear shed was a layer of protection being built. Each moment of silence, a whisper of resistance. The battle would not be fought with screams or accusations, but with my own dignity. I would rebuild myself, not to prove something to them, but to prove something to myself. The family exclusion would be just a chapter, not my complete story. The decision to confront Jake came like a silent scream within me. I could no longer bear being a hostage to his lies, a disposable piece in a twisted family game. The moment I decided to expose the truth, I felt a different energy coursing through my body, no longer the tremor of fragility, but the vibration of determination. I chose a neutral location for the meeting, an old cafe with worn walls, a silent witness to so many stories of confrontation and resolution. Jake arrived promptly, his gaze heavy with a false security I knew all too well. "I came to clear everything up," I told him, my voice firm, breaking the veil of fear that had always covered me. Each word was calculated, each argument supported by the evidence I had meticulously gathered. The evidence I brought was like mirrors reflecting his lies. Messages, emails, records dismantling his manipulative narrative. Jake tried to remain calm, but I noticed the tiny movements that betrayed his discomfort. "You can't prove anything," he said, trying to intimidate me as he always had. But now his strategy sounded empty, like a paper roar. My response was laden with a cold irony that caught him off guard. "Actually, I can, and I will." Each argument I presented was like a layer being removed, revealing the architecture of lies he had built. I was no longer the submissive sister accepting his accusations passively. I was someone transformed by pain, redefined by rejection. Jake attempted to discredit my evidence, but every attempt only sank him deeper. His manipulation strategies, which had once worked perfectly, now seemed pathetic and transparent. The confrontation was not about winning or losing. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about proving to myself that my worth didn't depend on his approval or my family's. When I finished presenting everything, a dense silence enveloped us. Jake was defeated, not by me, but by the very truth he had tried to hide. I stood up, not as someone defeated, but as someone who had finally set herself free. I didn't need his validation. My truth was mine, regardless of what he or anyone else thought. "It's over," I said simply, leaving behind not just Jake, but an entire family structure that had imprisoned me. In that moment, I understood that my greatest victory would not be proving anything to him, but recognizing myself as a complete person, free from the chains of lies that were imposed on me. The family environment transformed into a minefield of shattered emotions. Each day, I realized how the physical distance wasn't just geographic, but an emotional barrier built from bricks of hurt and misunderstanding. My parents, once figures of safety and love, now represented the most deafening silence I had ever experienced. Their attempts at reapproachment turned into true emotional battles. Each truncated phone call, each unanswered message revealed the chasm that Jake had dug between me and my family. His manipulation was so refined that he could transform my truth into a lie, my innocence into guilt. I began to seek support outside the family circle. Friends, some old acquaintances, became my temporary refuge. But the weight of family rejection lingered like a shadow, tainting every new relationship with the stigma of distrust. How could I explain something so complex without coming off as bitter or defeated? Loneliness enveloped me like thick fog, but gradually I began to see that this very loneliness was forging an internal armor. Each moment of isolation was an opportunity for reinvention. I would no longer be the silent victim, but the protagonist of my own story. Emotional scars began to transform into marks of resistance. The pain of exclusion, once paralyzing, became fuel for my reconstruction. I realized that my identity didn't depend on family approval, but on my own acceptance. Jake's manipulations revealed more about his fragility than about my alleged guilt. His need to destroy me demonstrated an internal emptiness that no false narrative could fill. Each of his attempts to undermine me was, in fact, a silent cry of his own insecurities. I meticulously documented every piece of evidence, not as a strategy for revenge, but as protection for my truth. Records, conversations, fragments proving my integrity. I would no longer be the narrative constructed by others, but the main storyteller of my journey. Physical distance became emotional freedom. Each mile took me away, not only from them, but from toxic patterns that had imprisoned me for years. The rejection, which once felt like a definitive sentence, became my certificate of autonomy. I discovered that belonging is not something given to us, but something we build. My blood family might deny me, but I would create my own concept of family, based on respect, understanding, and true love. The battle would not be fought with screams or accusations, but with my own dignity. I would rebuild myself, not to prove something to them, but to prove something to myself. The family exclusion would just be a chapter, not my definitive story. The climax of my story exploded like thunder on a seemingly calm day. The dinner table, once a symbol of family unity, became the stage for my deepest emotional battle. My eyes, once wet with tears, now shone with a determination I didn't even know I had. "Enough," I whispered, my voice initially tremulous, but quickly gaining strength. Jake looked at me with that cynical smile, so typical of someone who always believed they were above any scrutiny, but today would be different. I laid out a set of documents on the table, screenshots of conversations, emails. Each paper was a piece of the puzzle that would dismantle his lying narrative. My parents, Maria and Robert, exchanged surprised glances. For the first time, I would not be silenced. "Did you really believe I would be capable of doing what Jake is saying?" I asked, each word laden with a cutting irony that pierced the heavy air of the room. The family hypocrisy finally found resistance. Jake attempted to interrupt, but something in my gaze paralyzed him. I was no longer the submissive sister, but someone who had discovered her own strength. My evidence was not merely papers, but the materialization of my truth suffocated for years. Each of his accusations was deconstructed, every lie laid bare. My voice, once stifled by fear, now thundered with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Jake's manipulation crumbled under my precise arguments. My parents began to comprehend the extent of Jake's manipulation. Their faces, once rigid with judgment, now displayed a mixture of shock and shame. The truth, raw and relentless, struck them mercilessly. "You excluded me without listening," I declared. "But today I prove that my integrity is greater than any lie." Each word was a liberation blow, each revelation a step toward my reconstruction. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any argument. Jake was defeated, not by me, but by the very truth he had tried so hard to conceal. My parents, finally confronted with reality, could no longer sustain their favorite son's narrative. In that moment, I realized that my greatest revenge would not be to destroy them, but to rebuild myself. The exclusion they tried to impose on me would be transformed into my most powerful tool for growth. The dinner table, a silent witness to years of manipulation, was now the stage for my true liberation. No longer a victim, but the protagonist of my own story. The partial resolution unfolded like a mosaic of complex, heart-wrenching emotions. After the intense confrontation, the family revealed its true colors, a landscape of tension and exposed wounds. My parents, Maria and Robert, oscillated between shock and denial. Their gazes darted between silent guilt and the reluctance to acknowledge Jake's manipulation. It was like watching a theatrical piece where no one dared to break the protocol of the deafening silence. Jake, for his part, maintained his defensive posture, a wall built of lies and wounded pride. Each of my attempts to expose the truth was met with a calculated coldness, as if I were a nuisance to be quickly discarded. Their reaction was a mix of discomfort and denial. I realized it would not be an immediate reconciliation, but a slow process of deconstruction of deeply ingrained family narratives. Each word I spoke in the confrontation planted seeds of doubt that would slowly germinate in their minds. The pain of rejection still consumed me, but now it carried a different flavor. It was no longer just suffering, but transformation. Every tear shed carried less sorrow and more strength. I understood that my truth did not rely on their acceptance, but on my own conviction. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any word. It represented the exact moment when the family balance broke, revealing old fractures that had always been there, masked by an apparent harmony. I realized that this moment would not be a period, but a comma in my story. The exclusion, once seen as a sentence, transformed into an invitation for reconstruction. I would no longer be defined by what my family thought, but by who I chose to be. The physical distance separating me from them began to turn into a territory of emotional freedom. Each kilometer of separation brought me closer to myself, to a more authentic and empowered version of me. Jake would continue his manipulation game, but he would no longer affect me as he had before. His attempts to diminish me would reveal more about his fragility than about my alleged guilt. The truth would find its way, slowly but surely. My parents, confronted with the situation's complexity, would begin a journey of reflection. The pain of the family division would compel them to question old patterns, to see beyond the narrative crafted by Jake. The resolution would not be quick or complete. It would be a process of peeling back, where each layer of lies would be removed, revealing the nuances of a deeply complex and hurt family relationship. In that moment, I realized that my strength did not lie in being accepted, but in accepting myself. The family exclusion would be just a chapter, not my definitive story, and I was ready to write the next pages with all the courage I had discovered within myself. Time passes, and my life turns into a mosaic of discoveries and reconstruction. The physical distance from my family no longer defines me, but liberates me. Every day away from that toxic environment is an opportunity to reshape my existence. I now devote myself to exploring passions I once suppressed. Painting becomes my emotional refuge, where each brushstroke translates pain into beauty. The canvases I create are not just art, but reinterpreted scars, silent narratives of a journey of overcoming. Writing also reveals itself as a powerful ally. I begin to document my story, not as an act of revenge, but as healing. Each word is a liberation step, each paragraph a layer of reinterpretation. I realize that my true family is not defined by blood ties, but by connections based on respect and genuine love. The friends I choose are my new support nucleus. They are people who embrace me without judgment, who understand my journey without trying to fit me into pre-established narratives. With them, I discover that family can be a much broader and more welcoming concept than the one I knew. My work also becomes a source of fulfillment. I no longer hide in the shadow of family expectations, but build my own professional identity. Each accomplishment is a tribute to my resilience. Each challenge overcome a reminder of my inner strength. Therapy aids me in this journey of reconstruction. I learn to deconstruct toxic patterns, to value my own narrative. The family traumas no longer imprison me. They are merely chapters of a story I continue to write. I discovered that true freedom lies not in the absence of pain, but in the ability to transform it into growth. The exclusion that once paralyzed me now propels me forward. Jake and my parents remain in a past that no longer defines me. My message resonates like a whisper of hope. It is possible to rebuild oneself. It is possible to find peace even when the world seems to crumble. The family that rejected me did not understand the most important thing. By trying to destroy me, they only made me stronger. Today, I am free. Not because I am physically distant, but because I am completely at peace with myself. Each dawn is an opportunity to celebrate my own existence, my own story, my own concept of belonging. The pain of family exclusion transformed into my most powerful ally. Every tear shed was a step toward my liberation. I realized that the true home is not within the walls of a house, but within myself. The family that rejected me did not define my worth. Instead, they gifted me with the courage to rebuild myself. Today, I look back not with resentment, but with gratitude for the strength I found in my own vulnerability.